In the land where rivers gave rise to empires, ancient skywatchers climbed ziggurats and touched the stars with thought alone. Long before telescopes or theory, Sumerian priests gazed into the abyss and found pattern, not chaos. With reed styluses and patient eyes, they charted the heavens, birthing not just calendars and omens, but astronomy itself. They counted with 60 predicted eclipses and aligned shrines to the rhythm of the cosmos. From sacred towers, they mapped the firmament with divine precision, transforming myth into measurement. Venus, Mars, and Saturn became not gods alone, but data, timeless wanderers on calculable paths. What began as worship evolved into science, as Babylonian sages turned celestial mystery into mathematical truth. This is the story of how humanity first claimed dominion over time, how mortal minds dared to read eternity and write the first equations of the stars. Long before telescopes or equations, before science had a name, humans looked up and wondered. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, where civilization first took root, skywatchers stood beneath vast, unbroken horizons. With no tools but patience and their own eyes, they tracked the stars across the dome of night. Here, in these wide, open plains, they glimpsed patterns in the chaos, rhythms that would become the foundation of calendars, agriculture, and belief. This was the birthplace of astronomy, built not on technology, but on awe. The Sumerian seekers who climbed the first ziggurats carried more than prayers to their deities. In their hands lay reed styluses. In their minds burned questions that would consume generations. The lunar orb waxed and waned like an eternal eye, forever opening and closing in the heavens. The solar disk traced its daily journey from the blush of dawn to the hush of twilight, guided by forces beyond mortal ken. Across the velvet scroll of night, silver fire spelled out the will of the immortal, waiting for the initiated to read its signs. Night after night, these earliest astronomers stood upon sacred steps that seemed to pierce the very belly of eternity. Sin, the lunar deity, cast his silver light across tablet and stylus, while they carved their observations into wet clay. Marks that would outlive empires, scratches in earth that held the birth cries of science itself. They watched Shamash race his chariot across the firmament, noted how his path shifted through the seasons, like a cosmic serpent changing course. They tracked bright Ishtar, Venus the morning herald, Venus the evening queen, and wondered at her mysterious disappearances behind the solar disk's blazing glory. The mathematics of the cosmos demanded its own language, and these patient watchers gave the world a gift more precious than gold, the sacred number 60. Where others counted on 10 fingers, the learned astronomers of Sumer discovered the perfection of sexagesimal calculation. 60 became the heartbeat of creation, 60 minutes in each hour, 60 seconds in each minute, 360 degrees in the full circle of existence. This was no arbitrary choice, but cosmic law made manifest. For 60 could be divided cleanly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. The very architecture of space and duration bowed before this mathematical revelation. Upon ziggurats that rose like artificial mountains toward the realm of immortals, priest astronomers created humanity's first observatories. The great Tower of Babylon, whose peak seemed to scrape the jeweled darkness, aligned its corners with the cardinal directions as precisely as geometry demanded. At where Abraham would later hear his deity's voice, the massive pyramid's shadow told the hours with supernatural accuracy, while its upper platform provided an unobstructed view of night's theatre. These were not mere shrines, but cosmic instruments, built to catch starlight in their stone nets and transform chaos into comprehensible order. The luminous map of ancient Sumer divided the firmament into 3 great highways, each ruled by a mighty power whose influence extended from Earth to the uttermost reaches of darkness. The Way of Enlil stretched across the northern realm, where the wagon, later called the Great Bear, turned its eternal wheel around the unmoving pole. This was the domain of wind and storm, of the deity who separated the upper and lower worlds in the first days of creation. The central way of Anu, king of all powers, cut straight across the cosmic equator, where the most important luminaries performed their sacred dance. Here dwelt the bull of the heavens, the lion, the maiden with her wheat sheaf, constellations whose rising and setting marked the rhythm of earthly seasons. The southern way of Ea belonged to the Lord of Wisdom and Sweet Water, he who whispered secrets to the first kings and taught mortals the arts of civilization. In his domain swam the southern fish, while the raven spread its dark wings and the scorpion raised its venomous tail against the summer heat. Each constellation had its season, its meaning, its immortal message for those wise enough to read the cosmic script. These earliest maps became the foundation upon which all later astronomy would build. The Sumerians saw in the nocturnal canopy a great chronometer written in fire, where each luminary's rising foretold the proper moment for planting, for harvest, for the sacred festivals that bound Earth to eternity. When the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, first appeared before dawn, farmers knew the rains would soon begin. When mighty Orion strode across winter firmaments, shepherds prepared for the harshest cold. The luminous wanderers became humanity's first clock, almanac, and compass combined. But the greatest revelation came through patient observation of those wandering lights that refused to keep their places among their fixed companions. 5 bright objects moved through the sphere with purposeful intent. Mercury swift as thought, Venus blazing with immortal beauty, Mars red as spilled blood, Jupiter steady as a king, and Saturn slow as ancient wisdom. The Sumerians gave these wanderers names that echoed through eternity. They called them wild sheep, for their tendency to stray from the stellar flock, not knowing they watched fellow worlds dancing around the same cosmic fire that warmed their own Earth. Venus commanded special reverence as the dual-natured deity Inanna Ishtar, goddess of love and war, beauty and terror. As the morning herald, she was Inanna the maiden, announcing dawn with her pure light. As the evening queen, she became Ishtar the sovereign, blazing with fierce beauty in the western firmament. The Sumerian astronomers mapped her 8-year cycle with mathematical precision, discovering that 5 synodic periods of Venus equal 8 solar years, almost exactly, a harmony that spoke of intelligence behind the cosmos. The marriage of observation with earthbound necessity birthed the lunar chronology that would govern human affairs for millennia. The moon's phases provided nature's most obvious timekeeper, its 29.5-day cycle easily observed by any who cared to watch. 12 lunar months gave a year of 354 days. But here lay a problem that would torment astronomers for centuries. The seasons, governed by the solar disk's annual journey, demanded 365 days and a quarter. The cosmic marriage of lunar and solar cycles unfolded in quiet defiance, each moving to its own rhythm, yet bound in an eternal dance. An answer came through inspiration and mathematical genius combined. The Sumerian scholars discovered that adding an extra month 7 times in every 19 years would keep their lunar chronology aligned with the solar seasons. This intercalation, literally calling between, became one of humanity's first triumphs over cosmic chaos. The technique spread throughout the ancient world, allowing farmers to plant their crops at the proper moment, and ceremonial leaders to celebrate festivals when the immortals demanded them. Within sacred precincts, scribal schools flourished like gardens tended by supernatural gardeners. Young acolytes learned not only to read and write, but to calculate the movements of the firmament with ever-increasing precision. They memorized the stellar catalogues, practiced the mathematical techniques needed to predict eclipses, and studied the omen literature that connected cosmic events with earthly consequences. The greatest among them became the Baru, priest-diviners, whose knowledge of the luminous dome made them counselors to kings and interpreters of immortal will. Nabu, patron of scribes and writing, watched over these astronomical endeavors with special care. His shrine at Borsippa, called the house that links upper and lower worlds, became a center of learning where clay tablets accumulated like sediment from floods of knowledge. Here, generation after generation of learned watchers added their observations to the growing library of cosmic wisdom. Each eclipse carefully measured, each planetary position precisely recorded, each unusual phenomenon noted for future reference. Water clocks supplemented cosmic timekeeping, their steady drip marking the hours when clouds obscured the luminaries. These ingenious devices used the constant flow of water through carefully calibrated openings to divide day and night into equal portions. Shadow clocks traced the solar disk's path across the firmament, their gnomon posts casting shadows that moved like cosmic sundials across graduated scales. Duration itself became measurable, quantifiable, subject to human understanding rather than supernatural whim alone. The Sumerian king list, that ancient chronicle of dynasties stretching back to the flood, wove astronomical cycles into the very fabric of royal legitimacy. Kings ruled not merely by conquest or birth, but by cosmic approval, their reigns measured in the same mathematical harmonies that governed planetary motion. When a ruler died and the succession passed to his heir, court astronomers consulted the luminous dome to ensure the transition occurred at an auspicious moment. The kingdom's welfare depended as much on stellar alignment as on military strength or agricultural abundance. Trade networks carried astronomical knowledge along with precious goods, spreading Sumerian wisdom to distant lands. Merchants who could predict the proper seasons for travel, who knew when storms were likely and when the firmament would remain clear, enjoyed advantages that translated directly into profit. Caravan masters studied the luminous canopy as intently as ship captains, for the desert's trackless wastes demanded navigation by the eternal fires as surely as the wine-dark sea. The mathematics of the cosmos became the mathematics of commerce, binding the known world together with invisible threads of shared knowledge. Creation myths reflected this cosmic understanding, embedding astronomical observation in the very foundation of religious thought. The Mesopotamian flood narrative described how the immortals warned Utnapishtim of coming disaster by reading signs in the firmament, the same techniques later astronomers would use to predict eclipses and planetary conjunctions. When Marduk slew the chaos dragon Tiamat and arranged her dismembered body to form upper and lower worlds, he was performing the same act of imposing order that human astronomers performed each night when they mapped the luminaries and calculated their movements. Sacred festivals mark the great turning points of the astronomical year, with elaborate ceremonies that reinforce the connection between Earth and eternity. The Akitu celebration of the spring equinox lasted 11 days, during which the entire cosmic order was ritually renewed. The king's sacred marriage to the goddess, performed at the festival's climax, symbolically guaranteed that harmony would continue to bless the earthly realm. Similar ceremonies marked the summer and winter solstices, the autumn equinox, and the heliacal rising of important luminaries like Sirius. Eclipse prediction, that ultimate test of astronomical skill, began with careful observation of recurring patterns. Though the Sumerians had not yet discovered the precise 18-year, 11-day, 8-hour rhythm, they knew that eclipses followed cycles, that lunar eclipses occurred in families separated by specific intervals, that solar eclipses were rarer and more localized phenomena, when darkness swallowed the lunar orb during its full phase, or when the solar disk's face was covered by an invisible shadow. The astronomers' calculations proved their cosmic connection. To predict such awesome events elevated them above mere observers to the level of participants in the eternal dance. Mathematical tools, once meant for charting the skies, found surprising uses far beyond stargazing. The same techniques that tracked planetary positions could survey fields, calculate volumes of grain, determine fair prices for goods in the marketplace. Mathematics born from contemplating infinity found immediate application in the most mundane earthly affairs. The abstract became practical, the cosmic descended to serve human needs. International diplomacy often turned on astronomical expertise, as foreign courts sought Mesopotamian wisdom to legitimate their own rule. When the Elamite king needed to schedule his coronation for maximum approval, when the Hittite prince wanted to know whether the luminous dome favored his marriage negotiations, when Egyptian pharaohs required precise chronological calculations, all turned to the ziggurat schools, where astronomical learning flourished under supernatural protection. Knowledge became power, and astronomical knowledge became the ultimate expression of cosmic authority. As centuries passed and empires rose and fell, the watchers upon the sacred pyramids continued their patient vigil. They refined their observations, corrected their calculations, and gradually built the intellectual foundation upon which all later astronomy would rest. These were not primitive stargazers fumbling in darkness, but sophisticated mathematical astronomers whose achievements would astound their successors. They gave humanity its first scientific revolution, though they would have called it inspired revelation. The moment when chaos yielded to order, when the firmament opened its secrets to mortal understanding, when humanity first dared to claim partnership with the immortals, in reading the cosmic script written across eternity's vast scroll. The legacy of these earliest astronomers stretches far beyond their clay tablets and ziggurat observatories. Every instance we divide an hour into 60 minutes, or measure a circle in 360 degrees, we honor their discovery. Every chronological system that balances solar years with lunar months follows principles they established. Every horoscope cast, every eclipse predicted, every spacecraft navigated to the outer planets relies on mathematical techniques whose roots reach back to those first watchers who climbed toward the firmament on artificial mountains and returned with the gift of cosmic understanding. In the sacred precincts of Ur and Uruk, Babylon and Borsippa, Nippur and Sippar, the great work had begun. What started as religious duty, the need to know when the immortals demanded worship, became the foundation of all exact science. The learned servants who honored Shamash and Sin, Ishtar and Marduk, created more than chronological systems and omen collections. They created the intellectual framework within which humanity would eventually reach beyond Earth's atmosphere, to walk among the very luminaries their distant ancestors had mapped with such patient devotion. The revolution in human consciousness that began beside the twin rivers would echo through every subsequent age. When Greek philosophers spoke of cosmic harmony, when Islamic astronomers refined mechanics, when Renaissance scientists placed the solar disk at the center of the planetary system, when modern astrophysicists map galaxies billions of light years distant, all stood upon foundations laid by those first watchers who dared to believe that mortal minds could comprehend immortal mysteries. The journey from Earth to distant worlds began not with rockets and telescopes, but with reed styluses and wet clay, with patient observation and mathematical insight, with the revolutionary idea that the luminous dome was not chaos but cosmos, an ordered realm whose secrets waited for those bold enough to seek them. Bronze gates swung wide beneath the morning sun as Hammurabi returned to Babylon in triumph, his war chariot blazing with captured gold, while the greatest army ever assembled marched behind him through streets lined with cheering multitudes. Citizens threw flower petals from rooftops, merchants offered their finest wares as tribute, and children sang songs composed to honor the king who had united all the ancient lands under one divine scepter. Yet none of these earthly glories could match the prize that awaited within Esagila's sacred walls, a discovery that would make Mesopotamia master not merely of armies and territories, but of time itself and the very will of eternity. High above the celebration, in chambers where lamplight flickered against clay records covered with cuneiform script, the royal diviners had achieved something unprecedented in human history. Where previous generations had watched the luminous dome simply to mark seasons and festivals, these scholar sages had transformed observation into prophecy, turning the wandering lights into an alphabet of divine intention that could spell out the fate of kingdoms. Hammurabi himself climbed the tower's endless steps as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, his robes rustling against stone, worn smooth by centuries of royal pilgrims seeking wisdom from the cosmic realm. Behind him followed his most trusted advisors, generals whose bronze had never known defeat, governors whose provinces flourished like gardens, merchants whose caravans connected distant seas. All had come to witness the ceremony that would demonstrate why Babylon ruled not through force alone, but through knowledge that rivaled the immortals themselves. Master Ami Sarduka, greatest of the Baru interpreters, stood ready beside tables laden with fresh clay and reed styluses sharp as daggers. His weathered hands had inscribed more than 8 years of continuous records, documenting every appearance and disappearance of brilliant Ishtar, with precision that made earlier Skywatchers seem like children counting pebbles. Around him, junior scribes held burning torches, while the king's bodyguards maintained respectful silence. Even warriors knew better than to disturb the delicate work of reading eternity's intentions. "Behold," spoke the sage, his voice carrying across the platform like wind through barley fields, "how the Queen of Morning reveals her pattern to those who watch with patient eyes." His stylus moved across wet clay with the fluid grace of a master calligrapher, each mark preserving observations that would guide royal policy for generations yet unborn. 8 years of meticulous study had revealed the most astounding discovery since writing itself. Ishtar danced through the firmament in perfect mathematical harmony, her 5 synodic periods matching 8 solar years so precisely that mortal minds could predict her position decades into the future. Such revelations transformed the love goddess from mysterious wanderer into the most reliable herald of divine will. When she blazed forth as morning star, her message concerned warfare, conquest, and the expansion of royal power. When she reigned as evening queen, her influence turned toward diplomacy, marriage alliances, and the internal governance that kept kingdoms peaceful and prosperous. No decision of state could proceed without consulting her position among the zodiacal houses. No military campaign could begin until her cycle promised victory. Amisaduka's assistants unrolled scrolls containing records that stretched back through the reigns of 6 kings, each entry marking another step in humanity's conquest of cosmic uncertainty. Entry after entry documented the inexorable patterns hidden within apparent chaos, how eclipses followed families separated by specific intervals, how the Red Wanderer's retrograde loops could be predicted months in advance, how mighty Marduk's stately progress through the zodiacal mansions marked periods of 12 earthly years with clockwork precision. Such discoveries elevated Mesopotamian diviners far above mere fortune-tellers into the ranks of royal counselors whose advice shaped the fate of nations. Foreign courts dispatched ambassadors bearing gifts worth kingdoms, all seeking access to knowledge that could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe, prosperity and ruin. When the Elamite sovereign needed to time his coronation, when the Hittite prince planned his wedding, when Egyptian pharaohs required guidance for their temple dedications, all turned toward Babylon, where mortal minds had learned to read the script of eternity itself. Master interpreters like Amisaduqa combined sky reading with other forms of divination in syntheses that made them the most sought-after advisors in the ancient world. Before examining the liver of a sacrificial ram, they consulted the positions of the wandering lights to determine which portions of the organ would carry divine messages. After studying the patterns of oil poured onto water, they verified their interpretations against the current phase of Luna and the house occupied by warlike Mars. No single source could reveal the complete will of the immortals, but the convergence of multiple signs could illuminate the future with startling clarity. Eclipse prediction remained the supreme demonstration of divinatory mastery, the achievement that elevated scholar sages above ordinary mortals in the eyes of terrified populations. When darkness began to gnaw at Luna's silver disk, or shadow crept across the solar face, citizens who had witnessed such events foretold regarded their interpreters as wielding powers that bordered on the supernatural. Rulers who could anticipate these cosmic catastrophes gained credibility that no military victory could provide. They had proven their connection to the realm where immortals decided the fate of earthly kingdoms. Mathematical foundations underlying such predictions required intellectual achievements that would have impressed philosophers in distant Greece centuries later. Scholar sages discovered that lunar eclipses occurred in families separated by approximately 6 months, that these families themselves followed longer cycles stretching across decades, that careful record-keeping could distinguish between eclipses visible from Mesopotamia and those that would remain hidden beyond the horizon. Charts accumulating in tower libraries mapped the moon's wandering path through zodiacal houses with sufficient accuracy to predict which obscurations would terrorize their own populations and which would bring fear only to distant lands. When calculations indicated approaching danger, the royal court enacted ceremonies of extraordinary drama and symbolic power. The Shar Puhi ritual, the ceremony of the substitute sovereign, represented the ultimate fusion of mathematical astronomy with religious theatre. If omens suggested that an eclipse threatened the legitimate ruler's life, sages selected a condemned criminal or captured enemy to serve as temporary monarch during the dangerous period. For days surrounding the predicted event, this substitute wore royal garments, ate from golden vessels, and received honors due to kingship itself, while the true ruler lived in careful hiding, officially considered dead until the cosmic threat passed. When eclipse ended without catastrophe, the substitute faced execution, his death fulfilling the ominous prophecy while preserving the legitimate monarch's life. Such rituals concluded with the rightful king's triumphant return, his survival proving that mathematical knowledge combined with proper ceremony could deflect even the wrath of immortals. International networks carried Mesopotamian expertise to courts throughout the known world. creating webs of influence that extended far beyond military conquest or commercial advantage. Royal correspondence from the period reveals how astronomical information flowed between kingdoms, with Babylonian specialists serving as consultants to rulers whose own traditions lacked such sophisticated techniques. Letters preserved in clay archives show the Elamite sovereign requesting precise timing for important state ceremonies, while Egyptian records document pharaohs seeking guidance in calendar reform and eclipse prediction. Educational institutions within the Great Towers trained successive generations of scholar sages in mathematical techniques needed to track wandering lights and maintain accurate ephemerides. Young acolytes memorized star catalogues identifying hundreds of individual luminaries, learned to recognize subtle variations that distinguished one synodic period from another, and practiced complex arithmetic required for long-term predictions. These schools functioned as research centers, where knowledge accumulated like precious metals hoarded in royal treasuries, each graduating class adding new observations to archives that would guide human affairs for centuries to come. Ishtar emerged as supreme patron of this divinatory revolution, her dual nature making her the perfect symbol for marriage between observation and interpretation. Artists depicted her standing upon lions while holding the rod and ring of justice, stellar symbols blazing around her crowned head like a diadem forged from captured starlight. Her shrines became centers of learning, where scholar sages studied the 8-year cycle that made her movements as predictable as the rising and setting of the sun itself. Cuneiform records from this period preserve humanity's first systematic attempts at precision astronomy, documenting not merely when wandering lights appeared or disappeared, but measuring exact intervals between successive phenomena. Scribes recorded constellation backgrounds against which these events occurred, calculated accumulating errors that required periodic correction of mathematical models, and developed techniques for extrapolating future positions from past observations with accuracy that would not be surpassed for over a millennium. Royal archives swelled with texts as rulers recognized the political value of maintaining detailed records. The ability to predict eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and other rare phenomena provided courts with diplomatic advantages that translated directly into military and economic power. When neighboring kingdoms lacked such expertise, their rulers remained vulnerable to cosmic events that Mesopotamian astronomers could anticipate and prepare for months or years in advance. Seasonal festivals marking the great turning points of the astronomical year evolved into elaborate ceremonies that reinforced connections between cosmic order and political legitimacy. The Akitu celebration of spring equinox became theatrical reenactment of creation itself, with kings playing Marduk triumphing over primordial chaos. Such ceremonies required precision. The sacred marriage between monarch and goddess had to occur at the exact moment, when day and night balanced on the cosmic scales, when the forces of order and disorder hung in perfect equilibrium. Agricultural planning integrated astrological considerations with practical farming knowledge, creating syntheses that maximized both crop yields and supernatural protection. Farmers consulted wandering lights before planting fields, timed harvests to coincide with favorable positions, and scheduled irrigation projects when cosmic influences promised success. The 8-year cycle of Ishtar provided frameworks for long-term planning that coordinated individual farm management with kingdom-wide resource allocation. Omen literature, accumulating during Hammurabi's reign, established interpretive principles that would govern Mesopotamian divination for the next 2 millennia. These texts codified meanings associated with specific patterns in the firmament, creating standardized vocabularies that allowed consistent interpretation across different times and places. when Mars appeared in conjunction with the Scorpion's domain. Learned observers throughout the sphere of influence would recognize identical implications for military affairs and royal health. Mathematical techniques developed for tracking wandering lights found unexpected applications in fields ranging from commerce to engineering. Geometrical principles that calculated distances in the cosmic realm could survey agricultural land, design architectural projects, and solve complex problems involving trade routes and transportation logistics. Abstract mathematical concepts descended from tower observatories to serve immediate practical needs in marketplaces and construction sites throughout the growing empire. International trade networks carried expertise along with material goods, spreading sophisticated techniques throughout the ancient Near East. Merchants who could predict optimal seasons for long-distance travel, who knew when desert routes would remain passable, and when maritime conditions would favor safe passage, enjoyed competitive advantages that transformed them from simple traders into commercial powers capable of influencing the policies of kingdoms. As Hammurabi's reign drew toward its close and succession planning occupied the royal court, considerations drawn from sky reading shaped every aspect of political transition. The timing of the great king's death, the moment chosen for his heir's coronation, the ceremonial procedures that marked the transfer of power, all required consultation with scholar sages whose mathematical prowess had guided the kingdom through decades of unprecedented prosperity and expansion. Legacy of this divinatory revolution extended far beyond the borders of any single kingdom or the span of any individual reign. Techniques perfected in Mesopotamian towers would eventually influence Greek philosophy, Islamic science, and medieval European learning. The fundamental insight that events in the cosmic realm followed predictable patterns amenable to mathematical analysis laid foundations for all subsequent developments in astronomical theory. Standing upon Esagala's highest platform as stars emerged in the deepening twilight, Hammurabi gazed upward at the luminous dome that had once seemed chaotic and unpredictable, but now yielded its secrets to human understanding. Wandering lights that earlier generations had watched with fearful wonder now danced to mathematical rhythms that mortal minds could comprehend and predict. His reign had transformed astronomy from passive observation into active participation in the cosmic drama, from simple record-keeping into sophisticated prophecy, from isolated scholarly pursuit into the very foundation of statecraft itself. In chambers where torchlight flickered against clay records covered with calculations, the scholar sages of Babylon had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had proven that the dome of eternity operated according to laws that could be discovered, understood, and used to guide earthly affairs. Wandering lights were no longer merely beautiful objects scattered across the cosmic darkness. They had become signs, symbols, and ultimately tools in the hands of those wise enough to read their messages and bold enough to act upon their guidance. Dust clouds rose like bronze smoke across the Mesopotamian plains as Kassite horsemen thundered through Babylon's shattered gates, their war cries echoing off walls that had stood unconquered since the dawn of civilization. Behind them rode a new dynasty of mountain kings who spoke strange tongues and worshipped alien gods, yet possessed wisdom enough to recognize the treasure that lay hidden within the city's ancient towers. Where other conquerors might have burned libraries and scattered scholars to the winds, these barbarian rulers knelt before the accumulated wisdom of centuries and begged the sage watchers to continue their eternal vigil over the cosmic dome. Generations passed like seasons in a divine garden, each adding its own discoveries to the growing archive of human understanding. What had begun as royal divination under Hammurabi evolved into something far grander, systematic study that transformed isolated omens into comprehensive science. No longer content with reading individual signs in the firmament, the new generation of tower priests sought to map the entire machinery of eternity itself, to understand not merely what the wandering lights foretold, but why they moved as they did through the houses of the Zodiac. In the shadow of Esagila, where lamp flame flickered against endless rows of cuneiform records, young apprentices learned their trade under masters whose wisdom spanned lifetimes. Nabu Nasir bent over his writing table as the first luminaries appeared in the evening canopy, his weathered fingers guiding a reed stylus across wet clay with the artistry of a master craftsman. For 47 years, he had served the sanctuary as keeper of sky lore, recording every eclipse, every heliacal rising, every cosmic conjunction with devotion that bordered on religious ecstasy. Tonight, as he began yet another entry in the chronicles that would outlive empires, he paused to remember the moment when firmament watching had transformed from art into science. The change had come gradually, like dawn breaking over distant mountains, where earlier scholars had noted simply that Mars grew bright or Luna suffered darkening. The new masters demanded exact measurements. How many finger widths above the horizon did the Red Wanderer appear at sunset? How many degrees had mighty Marduk advanced through the Bull's domain since the previous month? Which specific luminaries served as background markers for cosmic positions, and how could their locations be described with mathematical accuracy? Such questions required tools more sophisticated than naked eyes and patient vigil. Within workshops attached to the great towers, craftsmen labored over instruments that would have seemed magical to earlier generations. The Merket, a sighting rod topped with a plumb line, allowed watchers to measure vertical angles with unprecedented exactness. Water-filled bowls became mirrors of the firmament, their still surfaces reflecting stellar positions that could be marked and measured. Calibrated shadow clocks tracked the sun's daily journey with accuracy that reduced the year's length to its proper 365 days and 1/4. Master Bel Ushezib, architect of the new methods, stood upon the tower's highest platform as midnight approached, and the cosmic dome revealed its full glory. Around him, apprentices held burning torches, while clerks prepared fresh clay for the night's work. The elderly sage had devoted his life to transforming firmament watching from sporadic record-keeping into continuous surveillance, establishing routines that would endure for centuries. Each night brought fresh discoveries. Each month produced updated calculations. Each year added another layer to the intellectual foundation upon which all future star science would rest. With the weight of decades steeped in stargazing, he shared his knowledge freely. The twins consistently emerged just 4 finger widths north of true east, a subtle cue worth memorizing. The bright star anchoring the lion's chest offered a vital reference point for tracking the drifting lights of the sky. And when Luna made her appearance, nothing less than a precise rendering of her illuminated shape would suffice. Such meticulous attention to detail characterized the revolution that transformed Mesopotamian star science during these centuries of foreign rule. Where previous generations had been content with approximate descriptions, the new masters insisted on quantitative exactness. They developed standardized units for measuring distances in the firmament, created coordinate systems for mapping stellar positions, and established protocols that ensured consistency across different locations and time periods. The compilation known as MULAPIN, named for the plough that marked spring's arrival, represented the culmination of this systematic approach to cosmic mapping. Completed around the time when Israel's judges ruled in distant Canaan, this masterwork catalogued 66 star groups arranged in 3 great pathways across the heavenly dome. Each entry provided not merely the pattern's name and mythological associations, but exact data about its rising times, its passage through the meridian, and its relationships with neighboring formations. Master clerks who created MULAPIN drew upon records stretching back through centuries of accumulated wisdom. They noted how the archer's bow pointed toward winter's heart, how the scorpion's tail swept across summer canopies in eternal opposition to mighty Orion, how the fishes swam through autumn's waters while the ram prepared to herald spring's return. Each star group received its proper place in the great chronometer that governed both agricultural seasons and religious festivals. Beyond simple mapping, MULAPIN revealed sophisticated understanding of the relationships between cosmic and terrestrial cycles. Its compilers calculated that 12 months of 30 days each produced a year too short by more than 5 days, requiring careful intercalation to keep lunar chronology aligned with solar seasons. They developed rules for adding extra months at regular intervals, creating mathematical frameworks that maintained accuracy across decades of continuous use. The text's treatment of wandering lights demonstrated how far Mesopotamian star science had advanced since Hammurabi's reign. Where earlier watchers had noted simply that these objects moved through the zodiacal houses, MULAPIN's authors provided detailed information about synodic periods, retrograde motions, and the complex patterns that governed each wanderer's apparent behavior. They recognized that Mars required approximately 26 months to complete one full cycle, relative to the fixed luminaries, that mighty Marduk needed 12 years for his grand tour of the zodiacal mansions, that Saturn moved so slowly that its complete circuit required nearly 3 decades. Such wisdom required institutional memory, spanning multiple generations, for no single watcher could witness enough cycles to discern these long-term patterns. Only through continuous record-keeping that preserved data across decades could scholars recognize the mathematical relationships hidden within apparent chaos. The great libraries of Babylon, Borsippa, and Sippar became repositories of learning that rivaled the treasure houses of kings in their accumulated value. Intercalation rules developed during this period solved the fundamental problem that had plagued lunar chronometers since their inception: how to reconcile the moon's cycle of 29½ days with the solar year of 365 days and 1/4. Master chronographers discovered that adding 7 extra months in every 19 years maintained nearly perfect synchronization between lunar and solar cycles, a mathematical insight that would be rediscovered centuries later by Greek philosophers and credited as a major intellectual achievement. Implementation of these intercalation rules required coordination across the entire Mesopotamian cultural sphere. For religious festivals and commercial contracts depended upon accurate time reckoning. Royal messengers dispatched announcements to distant provinces whenever intercalary months were added, ensuring that tribute payments, military campaigns, and diplomatic negotiations remained properly synchronized with the cosmic rhythms that governed all earthly affairs. Educational institutions flourished as the demand for trained star scientists expanded beyond royal courts to encompass sacred establishments throughout the region. The Academy of Sippar became renowned for its mathematical curriculum, where students learned to calculate wandering light positions using sophisticated arithmetic techniques. At Babylon, the school attached to Marduk's great shrine specialized in eclipse prediction and chronological maintenance. Borsippa's scholars focused on the theoretical foundations of cosmic wisdom, developing abstract principles that explained why heavenly phenomena followed predictable patterns. Master Nabu Rimani, whose name would echo through the centuries as one of star science's founding fathers, established teaching methods that transformed scattered data into systematic learning. His students learned not merely to record what they witnessed, but to understand the mathematical relationships that connected individual phenomena into comprehensive theories. Under his guidance, they developed the conceptual frameworks that would allow future generations to predict wandering light positions decades in advance. The accumulation of data during these centuries created archives that preserved humanity's most detailed records of cosmic phenomena. Clay documents from this period chronicle lunar eclipses with exactness that modern scientists use to study ancient variations in Earth's rotation rate. Records made by Mesopotamian scholars provide the longest continuous database of heavenly events available from the ancient world, spanning periods that witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Assyrian imperial expansion carried Mesopotamian expertise to the farthest reaches of the known world, as conquered territories provided tribute in the form of measurements made from different geographical locations. Scholars in distant provinces reported eclipses visible from their regions, but hidden from Babylon, expanding the empire's understanding of these phenomena and providing data that refined prediction techniques. King Ashurbanipal's great library at Nineveh represented the ultimate expression of imperial scholarship, gathering texts from throughout the Assyrian domains into a single collection that rivaled the archives of Babylon itself. Royal copyists duplicated documents from sacred libraries across the empire, creating backup records that preserved crucial wisdom against the ravages of war and natural disaster. When Nineveh fell to the Babylonians and Medes, these carefully preserved works ensured that centuries of accumulated learning survived the empire's destruction. Development of goal-year methods during this period revolutionized cosmic prediction by providing systematic approaches for extrapolating future phenomena from past records. Scholars discovered that many heavenly events repeated with sufficient regularity to allow mathematical forecasting, although the cycles involved often spanned decades or centuries. By studying these long-term patterns, they could predict not only when eclipses would occur, but which ones would be visible from specific locations. Agricultural applications of star science became increasingly sophisticated as farmers learned to coordinate planting and harvesting with cosmic cycles that extended far beyond simple seasonal indicators. The heliacal rising of Sirius marked the beginning of optimal planting seasons, while the positions of other bright luminaries indicated proper timing for irrigation, weeding, and grain storage. Such applications transformed firmament study from scholarly pursuit into practical technology that directly affected the empire's economic prosperity. International diplomatic correspondence from this period reveals how expertise enhanced Mesopotamian influence throughout the ancient Near East. Foreign courts regularly requested exact eclipse predictions, chronological consultations, and astrological interpretations from Assyrian scholars whose reputation for accuracy had spread throughout the known world. Such services created networks of intellectual exchange that often proved more durable than military alliances or commercial treaties. Mathematical techniques developed for cosmic calculations found applications in fields ranging from architecture to hydraulic engineering. The same geometric principles used to predict wandering light positions could design sacred complexes aligned with heavenly events, calculate the volumes of irrigation canals, and solve complex problems involving land surveying and construction logistics. Abstract mathematical learning descended from observatory towers to serve immediate practical needs throughout the empire. Religious festivals during this period achieved unprecedented synchronization with cosmic events, as improved prediction techniques allowed exact timing of ceremonies to coincide with heavenly phenomena. The Akitu celebration could now be scheduled to begin precisely at the spring equinox, while other festivals marked summer and winter solstices, with accuracy measured in hours rather than days. Such exactness enhanced the religious authority of sacred establishments, while demonstrating the practical value of star learning. Foreign students began arriving at Mesopotamian centers of learning as the empire's reputation for cosmic expertise spread throughout the civilized world. Young scholars from Egypt, Anatolia, and the Iranian plateau studied alongside Assyrian students, learning mathematical techniques and methods that they would carry back to their homelands. These intellectual exchanges created networks of wisdom that transcended political boundaries and cultural differences. Legacy of systematic study established during these centuries provided the foundation for all subsequent developments in star science. When the Neo-Babylonian dynasty arose from Assyria's ruins, they inherited not merely political control over Mesopotamia, but intellectual traditions that had transformed sporadic firmament watching into rigorous scientific discipline. The careful records, mathematical techniques, and theoretical insights accumulated through generations of patient work would soon enable achievements that would astound the ancient world and lay the groundwork for astronomy's greatest triumphs. As evening deepened into night and the cosmic dome revealed its full splendor above the ancient towers, the scholar sages of Mesopotamia continued their eternal vigil with confidence born of centuries of accumulated expertise. They had transformed the chaotic dance of wandering lights into comprehensible patterns, reduced the apparent randomness of eclipses to predictable cycles, and discovered mathematical relationships that governed phenomena spanning decades or centuries. Their achievement represented humanity's first conquest of cosmic time itself, the revolutionary realization that patient study, combined with mathematical analysis, could penetrate the deepest mysteries of existence and reveal the hidden order that governed all things beneath the luminous dome of eternity. Fire bloomed across the Assyrian capital as Babylon's armies swept through Nineveh's streets like an avenging flood, their bronze spears gleaming red in the light of burning palaces, while victory songs echoed from the ruins of the empire that had ruled the world for 3 centuries. Yet even as Ashurbanipal's great library crumbled into ash and rubble, the most precious treasures of Mesopotamian learning had already found safe harbor in the towers of the reborn city. Nebuchadnezzar the Great stood upon Esagil's highest platform, gazing out over his reclaimed capital, while below him, in chambers carved from living rock, the greatest computational minds ever assembled prepared to achieve what no mortals had dared attempt: the complete conquest of cosmic time itself. Chaldean princes who rose from Assyria's ashes brought more than military might to their ancient homeland. These desert rulers carried in their blood the nomads' intimate knowledge of celestial paths and seasonal rhythms, combined with reverence for the computational traditions that had made Babylon the intellectual center of the world. Under their patronage, the scholar sages who had preserved Mesopotamian learning through centuries of foreign rule emerged from shadows into the full light of royal favor, their archives and instruments finally receiving support worthy of their accumulated wisdom. Within the deepest vaults of Marduk's sacred precinct, where lamplight played across walls lined with cuneiform records stretching back to the dawn of writing itself, 2 figures bent over calculations that would transform human understanding of the cosmic realm forever. Nabu-Ramani of Babylon, whose name would echo through eternity as the founder of algorithmic sky science, traced complex arithmetic progressions across fresh clay, while his rival and collaborator Kidinu of Sippar verified each step with the ruthless exactness that had made Mesopotamian star lore the wonder of the ancient world. These were not the patient watchers of earlier generations, content to record phenomena as divine mysteries beyond mortal comprehension. Nabu-Rimani and Kidinnu represented a new breed of scholar sage who approached the firmament as computers rather than mystics, seeking to reduce the apparent chaos of wandering lights into arithmetical relationships that could be expressed in numbers, foretold with formulae, and verified through generations of accumulated data. They stood on the threshold of humanity's greatest intellectual revolution, the moment when watching would yield to calculation, when the future itself would become subject to numerical prophecy. Nabu-Rimani stood before his students, stylus gliding over clay as he charted the subtle variations of Luna's motion, changes too fine for the unaided eye to catch. Her pace shifted along her path, slow and deliberate near apogee, like a weary priest ascending the temple's steps, then swift and sharp as she neared perigee, racing across the sky like a falcon in pursuit. This rhythm obeyed not the caprice of gods, but the firm logic of arithmetic and geometry. The insight that would make his name immortal came through years of studying Luna's travel, with an exactness that surpassed all previous efforts. Where earlier scholars had been content to note that the moon sometimes moved faster and sometimes slower through her zodiacal mansions, Nabu-Rimani demanded quantitative precision. He divided Luna's path into zones, calculated her speed in each region, and discovered that these changes followed a linear function that could be expressed in simple arithmetic terms. His method, A, as later scholars would name it, treated Luna's travel as a series of straight-line segments, each with its own constant speed. The computational elegance was breathtaking. By dividing the moon's orbit into just two zones of different speeds, he could foretell her location months or years in advance with accuracy that seemed almost supernatural to contemporary observers. The faster zone covered the region where Luna approached closest to Earth, while the slower zone corresponded to her most distant passages through the cosmic dome. Kidinnu of Sippar, younger and more daring than his Babylonian colleague, pursued a different approach that would prove even more revolutionary in its implications. Where Nabu-Rimani saw straight lines and constant speeds, Kidinnu perceived smooth curves and continuously varying travel. His method B modeled Luna's speed as a trigonometric function, rising and falling in sinuous waves that captured the true geometry of orbital mechanics with stunning arithmetical beauty. Competition between these two approaches created an intellectual ferment that transformed every aspect of Mesopotamian star science. Students of rival schools debated the merits of linear versus curvilinear functions, while their masters refined techniques that pushed computational sky law to heights undreamed of by previous generations. Each approach had its advantages. Method A was simpler to calculate and easier to teach, while Method B achieved superior accuracy for long-term forecasting. Both techniques shared the revolutionary insight that would distinguish Mesopotamian star science from all earlier traditions. The movements of wandering lights could be foretold through pure computation, without reference to divine will or supernatural intervention. The cosmic realm operated according to mechanical laws, as rigid and predictable as the flow of water through irrigation channels, or the oscillation of a plumb line. Once these laws were discovered and expressed in numerical terms, the future locations of Luna, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn could be calculated with precision, limited only by the accuracy of the underlying algorithms. Discovery of the Saros pattern represented the culmination of centuries of eclipse records and the triumph of pattern recognition over superstitious fear. Through patient analysis of archives stretching back to Hammurabi's reign, chronographers identified the magical number that governed lunar eclipses, 223 lunations, equivalent to 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. After this precise interval, the cosmic geometry that produced eclipses repeated with such exactness that not only the occurrence, but the duration, magnitude, and visibility of each eclipse could be foretold decades in advance. Master Nabu Nasir, guardian of the eclipse records that had made such revelations possible, presented clay tablets before King Nebuchadnezzar. These documents marked a turning point. Royal decisions would no longer be driven by fear or reaction, but by foresight. With trembling voice and unwavering conviction, he revealed that the great eclipse destined to darken Luna in the 7th year of the king's reign could already be predicted, its timing and shadow precisely mapped. The age of waiting for divine signs in helpless silence had ended. The mechanics of the cosmos had begun to yield their secrets. Such forecasts elevated Babylonian courts above all earthly rivals in the eyes of both subjects and foreign powers. When eclipses occurred exactly as the scholars had foretold, when wandering lights appeared in predicted locations, when the complex dance of cosmic bodies unfolded according to algorithmic prophecy rather than divine caprice, even the most skeptical observers acknowledged that Mesopotamian learning had achieved something approaching supernatural insight. Computational techniques required for such forecasts pushed arithmetic to levels of sophistication that would not be surpassed for over a millennium. Mesopotamian computers, for such they truly were, though they calculated with clay and stylus rather than electronic circuits, developed algorithms for tracking wandering light locations that involved complex operations with sexagesimal fractions, interpolation between tabulated values, and iterative procedures for solving nonlinear equations. Tables produced by these arithmetical virtuosos represented the flowering of 2,000 years of accumulated study and theoretical development. Each clay document contained columns of numbers that captured the essential rhythms of cosmic travel, the dates when planets would reach opposition or conjunction, the locations they would occupy in the zodiacal houses, the magnitudes they would display at different phases of their journeys. These tables allowed astrologers and administrators to plan ceremonies, military campaigns, and diplomatic initiatives months or years in advance, secure in the knowledge that the cosmic influences had been properly calculated and interpreted. Establishment of the Neo-Babylonian era in 747 BC provided chronographers with a standardized reference point for dating events across centuries of continuous study. This era, beginning with the reign of the Babylonian king whose name it bore, created a uniform timeline that eliminated the confusion arising from different local calendar systems and regnal years. Skywatchers throughout the Mesopotamian sphere of influence could now correlate their measurements with unprecedented precision, creating databases that spanned generations and enabled the recognition of patterns too long for any individual scholar to witness. Within the sacred precincts of Babylon and Borsippa, observatories that had served watchers for millennia underwent reconstruction to meet the demands of precision computation. The ancient ziggurats received new platforms equipped with graduated measuring devices, water clocks calibrated to track time intervals with unprecedented accuracy, and sighting instruments that could determine locations to fractions of a degree. These facilities represented humanity's first true research institutes, where theoretical forecasts were tested against empirical reality in a continuous process of hypothesis and verification. One striking example of the mathematical brilliance of Mesopotamian astronomy was their discovery that Jupiter's synodic period, 399 days, closely matched a simple fraction of the solar year. By comparing 399 to 365, they arrived at a ratio of about 71 to 65, revealing a deeper harmony between the planets and the calendar. Such relationships revealed deep harmonies within the cosmic order that suggested underlying geometric principles governing all movements. The realization that wandering light periods could be expressed as ratios of small integers hinted at a universe far more elegant and comprehensible than earlier generations had imagined. Mars presented greater challenges to computational astronomers due to its highly eccentric orbit and dramatic variations in brightness and apparent travel. The Red Wanderer's retrograde loops, when it seemed to reverse direction and journey backward through the zodiacal houses, had puzzled earlier observers who interpreted these phenomena as expressions of divine wrath or cosmic disorder. The new computational sky science revealed these loops as natural consequences of Earth's own travel relative to Mars, though the Mesopotamians understood this in terms of relative speeds rather than heliocentric geometry. Saturn's stately progress through the zodiacal mansions, requiring nearly 30 years to complete one full circuit, provided ideal material for testing long-term forecasting techniques. The slow planet's travel was regular enough to permit accurate algorithmic modeling, while spanning time periods sufficient to validate theoretical calculations against empirical reality. Students of Nabu Rimani's school made Saturn studies a central part of their training, learning to track the distant wanderer's location with patience that matched its leisurely cosmic pace. Computational treatment of Venus incorporated the 8-year pattern discovered centuries earlier, while extending forecasting techniques to capture subtle variations that had eluded previous generations. Tables could specify not only when the brilliant luminary would disappear behind the solar disk or emerge as morning herald, but also her exact location among the zodiacal houses, her brightness relative to other lights, and the duration of each phase of her complex journey. Mercury, swift and elusive, challenged even the most skilled computational astronomers with its rapid changes and brief periods of visibility. The smallest wanderer's proximity to the Sun made study difficult and forecasting crucial for astrological applications. Tables for Mercury represented triumphs of algorithmic ingenuity, capturing the essential features of the planet's behavior through computational techniques that compensated for limited visibility. International recognition of Babylonian supremacy drew students and scholars from throughout the ancient world to study in the tower schools where cosmic mysteries yielded to arithmetic analysis. The court of Cyrus the Great sought expertise for timing the Persian Empire's administrative reforms, while Egyptian priests requested assistance in reconciling their traditional calendar with the precision that had made Mesopotamian chronography the standard for international diplomacy. Fusion of algorithmic forecasting with traditional astrological interpretation created new forms of divination that combined quantitative precision with symbolic meaning. Where earlier generations had been content to note that Mars appeared in the lion's domain, astronomers could specify the exact degree of the Red Wanderer's location, the duration of its stay within that mansion, and the precise dates when it would move to neighboring regions. Such detailed forecasts transformed astrology from qualitative art into quantitative science. Commercial applications of computational sky science provided practical benefits that justified royal investment in theoretical research. Merchants planning long-distance expeditions could consult tables to determine optimal departure dates, when influences favored safe travel and profitable negotiations. Agricultural administrators used lunar tables to schedule planting and harvesting operations that maximized both crop yields and supernatural protection. Even military commanders found value in documents that foretold when eclipses might terrorize enemy forces or when configurations would enhance their own troops' morale. Algorithmic innovations of this period established computational techniques that would influence sky science for the next 2 millennia. The use of mean travel tables, the development of interpolation algorithms, the systematic treatment of periodic functions, all originated in the tower schools of Babylon and Borsippa during these crucial centuries when watching finally yielded primacy to algorithmic analysis. Preservation of computational methods through carefully copied manuals ensured that future generations could reproduce and extend achievements even when the original theoretical insights were forgotten or misunderstood. These procedural texts functioned as algorithmic cookbooks, providing step-by-step instructions for calculating wandering light locations without requiring deep understanding of the underlying principles. Such practical guides made sophisticated computation accessible to scholars throughout the Mesopotamian cultural sphere. The revolutionary insight that separated Mesopotamian sky science from all earlier traditions lay in recognizing that cosmic phenomena could be reduced to arithmetic relationships. Where previous generations had seen chaos requiring divine intervention to explain, the new masters perceived order amenable to analysis. They discovered that the apparent randomness of eclipses concealed rigorous periodicity, that the wandering lights followed paths as predictable as geometric theorems, that the entire cosmic realm operated according to laws expressible in numerical terms. This transformation from qualitative description to quantitative analysis represented humanity's first conquest of natural law through pure intellect. The Mesopotamian scholars had proven that mortal minds could penetrate the deepest mysteries of existence through patient study combined with algorithmic reasoning. Their achievement established the fundamental principle underlying all subsequent scientific development, that the universe operates according to discoverable rules amenable to analysis and prediction. Foreign courts recognized the practical advantages that computational sky science provided to Babylonian diplomacy and administration, when negotiations required optimal timing for maximum divine favor, when military campaigns needed coordination with favorable cosmic influences, when religious ceremonies demanded precise synchronization with heavenly events. All turned to Mesopotamian experts whose forecasting accuracy had become legendary throughout the civilized world. Students from Egypt, Persia, and Greece traveled to Babylon seeking instruction in the computational techniques that had made Mesopotamian sky science supreme among all intellectual traditions. These international exchanges created networks of knowledge that transcended political boundaries, spreading algorithmic methods throughout the ancient Near East and beyond. The mathematical insights developed in Mesopotamian tower schools would eventually influence Islamic science, medieval European learning, and the foundations of modern computational techniques. The legacy of this computational revolution extended far beyond its immediate practical applications. By proving that cosmic phenomena followed discoverable laws amenable to prediction, Mesopotamian scholars established the intellectual framework within which all subsequent scientific development would occur. Their insight that mathematical relationships governed natural processes laid the foundation for every later achievement in physics, chemistry, biology, and engineering. As evening descended upon the towers of Babylon and the eternal dance of wandering lights began another night of its cosmic performance, the scholar sages who had unlocked the algorithmic secrets of cosmic travel could claim achievement unparalleled in human history. They had proven that the dome of eternity, far from being a realm of chaotic divine whims, operated according to laws as precise and predictable as the most elegant arithmetic theorems. The universe had revealed itself as a cosmic calculating machine, whose future states could be determined through analysis of its past behavior. In chambers where clay documents covered with numbers captured the essential rhythms of existence itself, the masters had achieved humanity's first conquest of the future. Their algorithms could reach across years or decades to specify when eclipses would darken Luna's face, when Mars would blaze brightest in the midnight firmament, when Venus would herald dawn or proclaim the evening's arrival. They had transformed the study of heaven from patient watching into active forecasting, from religious meditation into computational science, from humble submission before cosmic mysteries into bold partnership with the eternal forces that governed all things beneath the luminous dome of eternity. The computational revolution that began in the tower schools of Mesopotamia established humanity's first systematic conquest of natural law through pure intellect. Where earlier generations had trembled before cosmic mysteries they could neither understand nor predict, these arithmetical pioneers had proven that patient analysis combined with computational precision could penetrate the deepest secrets of existence. Their legacy would inspire every subsequent generation of scientists who dared to believe that the universe operated according to discoverable laws, amenable to human understanding and algorithmic mastery. Babylon's ancient towers cast long shadows across the Euphrates as the first pale luminaries emerged in the deepening twilight, their silver light reflecting off the polished bronze doors of Asagila, where the greatest transformation in human destiny was about to unfold. Within chambers that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, Master Berossus bent over a clay document unlike any that had ever been inscribed by mortal hands. The year was 410 BC, and spread before him lay computations that would revolutionize humanity's understanding of individual fate. The first birth map ever cast, marking the moment when the cosmic dome ceased to speak only of kingdoms and harvests and began whispering the secrets of private destiny to anyone bold enough to listen. The child whose arrival sparked this revolution would never know how his first cry had changed the world. Born as Ishtar, blazed in the mansion of the twins, while mighty Marduk stood guard in the domain of the fishes, his nativity became the template for a new form of divination that would transform star reading from the exclusive province of kings into a science that touched every human life. Where previous generations had consulted the firmament only for affairs of state, the fate of armies, the fortune of dynasties, the destiny of nations, Berossus and his fellow innovators dared to claim that the wandering light spoke with equal eloquence about the humblest peasant and the mightiest monarch. This intellectual revolution had been centuries in the making, built upon foundations laid by generations of patient observers who had mapped the cosmic dome with ever-increasing precision. The 12 mansions of the star circle, those equal divisions of 30 arc segments each that carved eternity's wheel into comprehensible portions, represented the culmination of insights that stretched back to the dawn of Mesopotamian sky science. No longer were the constellations irregular star patterns scattered randomly across the firmament. They had been transformed into precise geometric zones, each with its own character, power, and symbolic meaning. At the head of the celestial march moved the ram, his golden fleece alight with the fire of spring. He carried the sun across the equator, marking the moment when light and darkness shared the sky equally. Behind him followed the bull, mighty Gugalana, whose snorting breath brought the rains that swelled the rivers and greened the fields. The twins danced hand in hand through late spring skies, their eternal bond symbolizing communication, learning, and the restless curiosity that drove mortals to seek knowledge beyond their station. Summer's heart belonged to the crab, whose sideways scuttle marked the solar disk's highest climb and longest pause before beginning its descent toward autumn. The lion roared his dominion over the hottest days, when Ishtar blazed brightest and the very air shimmered with heat that made strong men seek shade and wise men postpone travel until evening's cool embrace. The Virgin followed with her wheat sheaf, marking harvest time, when the year's labor bore fruit and granaries filled with golden grain. Autumn began with the scales, that perfect symbol of equilibrium, when light and darkness once again shared the sky in equal measure. The scorpion raised his venomous tail as the sun's power waned and shadows grew longer, his deadly sting a reminder that death walked always beside life in the eternal dance of existence. The archer drew his bow toward winter's heart, his arrow pointing toward the darkest days when the solar disk would reach its furthest retreat. Winter's depths belonged to the sea-goat, that strange hybrid creature whose fishtail connected earth to water, while his horned head climbed toward heaven's height. The water-bearer poured out the rains that would end the dry season and prepare the soil for spring's return, while the fishes swam through the cold depths of the year's end, their circular dance symbolizing the eternal return that brought each ending back to a new beginning. These 12 stellar domains had been recognized for centuries, but their transformation into precise 30-arc segments represented a revolutionary breakthrough that elevated Mesopotamian star lore above all competing traditions. Where Egyptian astronomers divided the firmament into 36 decans of 10 arc units each, and where other cultures created their own irregular divisions based on prominent star groups, the Babylonian innovation of 12 equal mansions created a framework of stunning elegance and practical utility. Each stellar mansion received its own wandering light rulers, creating hierarchies of cosmic power that would govern astrological interpretation for millennia. Mars claimed dominion over both the ram and the scorpion, his warrior nature expressing itself through spring's aggressive growth and autumn's destructive harvest. Ishtar ruled the bull and the scales, her dual nature as morning herald and evening queen, reflecting the goddess of love's authority over both material abundance and social harmony. Mercury's swift intelligence governed the twins and the Virgin, connecting the messenger's role in communication with the practical wisdom needed for successful harvests. The moon's changeable nature found expression through the crab, whose protective shell symbolized lunar authority over home, family, and the rhythms of domestic life. The sun naturally ruled the lion, pouring his golden radiance into the mansion that marked his highest glory and greatest power. Marduk's beneficent authority extended over the archer and the fishes, connecting the giant wanderer's role as teacher with both the philosophical quest for truth and the mystical understanding that transcended rational thought. Saturn's stern discipline claimed the sea-goat and the water-bearer, his slow progress through the stellar mansions, reflecting the patient wisdom that came only through long experience and careful study of cosmic law. The theoretical framework that governed wandering light rulerships drew upon centuries of accumulated observation and symbolic interpretation. Mars earned his association with the ram through the red wanderer's fierce brightness when it appeared in that region of the firmament, while his connection to the scorpion reflected ancient memories of when the crimson light had blazed like a baleful eye in autumn skies. Ishtar's rulership over the bull and scales connected her 8-year rhythm with the agricultural abundance of spring and the social harmony needed for autumn festivals. Exaltation principles added another layer of complexity to this emerging system, identifying specific arc measurements where each wanderer achieved its greatest power and authority. The sun reached exaltation in the ram, his spring location marking the moment of maximum solar ascendancy over the forces of darkness and cold. The moon found her exaltation in the bull, connecting lunar fertility with Earth's abundance in the season of growth and flowering. Saturn achieved exaltation in the scales, his slow wisdom perfectly suited to the equilibrium point, where opposing forces achieved harmony through careful measurement and patient adjustment. Marduk reached his height in the crab, the giant wanderer's protective authority harmonizing with the lunar mansion's concern for family, home, and the security that came from proper preparation and provident planning. Mars found exaltation in the sea goat, his warrior energy channeled into the disciplined climbing that conquered mountains and overcame obstacles through persistent effort rather than impulsive violence. Ishtar achieved her greatest power in the fishes, her love nature expressing itself through the mystical unity that dissolved all boundaries and barriers between separate souls. Mercury's exaltation in the Virgin connected the messenger's practical intelligence with the careful discrimination needed for successful harvests and the detailed knowledge required for proper timing of agricultural operations. These exaltation arc points became focal regions for advanced astrological computation, locations where wandering light powers reached maximum intensity and created opportunities for exceptional achievement or catastrophic failure. Development of geometrical relationships between wandering lights represented another crucial innovation that transformed star reading from simple location watching into complex angular analysis. Conjunction occurred when two luminaries occupied the same stellar arc measurement, their combined powers creating either powerful harmony or destructive conflict, depending upon the natures of the wandering bodies involved. Opposition manifested when luminaries stood exactly opposite each other across the stellar circle, their opposing powers creating tension that demanded resolution through conscious effort and careful balance. Trine connections linked wandering lights separated by 120 arc units, creating harmonious relationships that facilitated easy expression of combined energies. Square connections, formed by 90-unit separations, generated dynamic tension that stimulated action but required skill and wisdom to channel constructively. Sextile connections of 60 units created opportunities for cooperative effort between wandering light powers, while various minor geometries added subtle modifications to the basic angular patterns. The sophistication required for computing these angular relationships pushed Mesopotamian star law far beyond simple observation into the realm of precise geometric analysis. Diviners needed to determine not only where wandering lights stood in the stellar mansions, but also their exact arc measurements and fractional units, the orbs of power that extended geometrical effects beyond precise angular measurements, and the strength modifications that resulted from different types of relationships. Wandering light periods, those recurring rhythms that governed each luminary's return to specific stellar locations, became fundamental tools for predictive star reading. Ishtar's 8-year pattern allowed diviners to anticipate when the love goddess would repeat particular stellar configurations, while Mars's 26-month rhythm enabled forecasting of the warrior's power over individual and political affairs. Marduk's 12-year journey through the complete stellar circle created longer-term prognostication possibilities, while Saturn's 30-year rhythm governed the most profound individual transformations and generational changes. Subdivision of stellar mansions into smaller segments created additional refinement possibilities that distinguished Mesopotamian star lore from all competing traditions. Dodecatomoria divided each 30-unit mansion into 12 segments of 2.5 units each, creating micro-stellar patterns that repeated the larger stellar sequence within each individual region. These subdivisions allowed diviners to discriminate between individuals born in the same stellar mansion but at different times, providing the precision needed for meaningful individual prognostication. Computation of lots, mathematical points derived from the locations of sun, moon, and horizon point, added another dimension to birth map interpretation. The lot of fortune computed by adding the moon's location to the horizon point and subtracting the sun's arc measurement, identified the stellar point where material success and worldly achievement would manifest most powerfully. The lot of spirit, derived through similar computations with the sun and moon locations reversed, indicated where spiritual development and intellectual achievement would flourish. Additional lots governed specific life areas. The lot of marriage revealed optimal timing and compatibility factors for romantic relationships, while the lot of children indicated fertility periods and the characteristics of offspring. The lot of death, despite its ominous name, actually showed periods of major life transformation rather than literal mortality, while the lot of profession indicated career paths most harmonious with individual birth patterns. Persian authority during the Achaemenid period introduced new elements that enriched traditional Mesopotamian techniques without displacing their fundamental structures. Persian magi contributed their own stellar observations and calendrical innovations, while their emphasis on dualism added depth to the interpretation of wandering light conflicts and harmonies. The synthesis of Persian and Babylonian traditions created hybrid techniques that combine the computational precision of Mesopotamian analysis with the philosophical sophistication of Persian theology. The figure of Berossus himself embodied this cultural synthesis, serving as priest of Marduk in Babylon, while maintaining correspondence with Greek scholars who sought access to Mesopotamian traditions. His writings, composed in Greek for international audiences, carried Babylonian birth mapping techniques throughout the Hellenistic world, while preserving their essential character, despite translation into foreign linguistic and cultural contexts. International recognition of Babylonian superiority drew students from throughout the ancient world to study in the tower schools, where individual destiny yielded its secrets to computational analysis. Egyptian priests sought to understand how private fate could be computed with the same precision that governed eclipse prognostication, while Persian nobles commissioned birth maps that would guide their children's education and career planning. Practical applications of birth mapping extended far beyond mere curiosity about individual fate. Parents consulted diviners to determine optimal timing for conception and delivery, seeking to ensure that their children would enter the world under favorable stellar conditions. Merchants used astrological timing to schedule important business ventures, while craftsmen consulted their birth maps to identify periods when their skills would achieve maximum recognition and profit. Medical applications of birth mapping created new possibilities for preventive healthcare that combined computational analysis with traditional healing wisdom. Physicians could identify constitutional weaknesses indicated by unfavorable wandering light locations and prescribe remedies that would strengthen the body's defenses during vulnerable periods. The timing of medical treatments could be coordinated with favorable lunar phases and beneficial wanderer passages, maximizing the effectiveness of therapeutic interventions. Educational planning benefited from analysis that revealed each child's natural aptitudes and learning preferences. Students with strong Mercury dominance received training in mathematics, writing, and commercial skills, while those dominated by Mars energy were directed toward military careers or physical crafts. Ishtar-dominated children showed aptitude for arts, music, and diplomatic careers, while Marduk's children excelled in religious studies, philosophy, and teaching. Marriage matching became increasingly sophisticated as diviners developed techniques for comparing birth maps and identifying compatible partnerships. The relative locations of Ishtar in each partner's map indicated romantic compatibility, while Mars placements revealed potential areas of conflict or mutual stimulation. Solar and lunar relationships showed the fundamental harmony or discord between essential character types, while Mercury connections determined intellectual compatibility and communication effectiveness. Emergence of mundane star reading, the application of birth mapping techniques to collective entities like cities, nations, and institutions, created new possibilities for political and social analysis. The founding moments of cities could be treated as birth events, with maps cast for the exact time when construction began or when official dedication ceremonies occurred. These municipal maps provided frameworks for understanding each city's character, foretelling its periods of growth or decline, and identifying optimal timing for important civic projects. Royal birth maps became state secrets that shaped everything from succession planning to military strategy. Princes born under favorable configurations received enhanced educational opportunities and rapid advancement, while those with challenging birth patterns might be redirected toward religious careers or administrative roles that better suited their stellar endowments. The timing of coronations, royal weddings, and important state ceremonies required careful coordination with astrological factors that would maximize divine favor and popular acceptance. Development of prognostication techniques allowed diviners to trace the unfolding of birth potentials through time, creating dynamic interpretations that showed how inherent character traits would manifest during different life periods. Primary directions computed the symbolic movement of birth factors through the stellar mansions, while secondary progressions tracked the day-for-year correspondence between birth patterns and future developments. Current wanderer passages, the movement of present-day luminaries over birth map points, provided the most immediate and practical forecasting tools for individual guidance. When Marduk passed over the birth sun, periods of expansion and opportunity would manifest, while Saturn's passage brought challenges that demanded discipline and patient effort. Mars' passages activated energy and conflict. Ishtar's passages brought love and artistic inspiration, and Mercury passages enhanced communication and learning opportunities. The computational complexity required for accurate passage tracking pushed Mesopotamian techniques to new levels of sophistication. Diviners needed to maintain current wandering light locations for all 7 luminaries, while simultaneously tracking their relationships to multiple birth maps. Development of standardized ephemerides became essential for professional practice, ensuring that diviners throughout the Mesopotamian sphere could access accurate locational data for their computations. International diplomacy increasingly incorporated astrological considerations as rulers recognized the practical advantages that stellar timing provided for important negotiations and treaty arrangements. Ambassadors carried birth maps of foreign monarchs to guide their approach strategies, while treaty signing was scheduled for moments when wandering light configurations favored mutual cooperation and long-term stability. Legacy of Mesopotamian birth mapping extended far beyond its immediate cultural context, establishing conceptual frameworks and technical methods that would shape individual destiny analysis for the next 2 millennia. The 12 mansions stellar system, the wandering light rulership and exaltation schemes, the geometrical relationships and prognostication techniques all originated in the tower schools of Babylon and Borsippa during these crucial centuries, when private fate first became subject to computational analysis. As evening deepened into night and the wandering lights began their eternal dance across the stellar dome, Master Berossus completed the final computations that would make his name immortal in the annals of human achievement. The birth map spread before him contained more than mere data. It held the keys to understanding how stellar forces shaped individual character, shaped private relationships, and guided the unfolding of human potential through the rhythms of earthly existence. in chambers where clay documents covered with birth mapping computations captured the essential rhythms of individual destiny, the Mesopotamian masters had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had proven that the same principles governing the movements of wandering lights and the prognostication of eclipses could illuminate the most intimate dimensions of private experience. The stellar dome that once spoke only of harvest times and royal fates now whispered individual secrets to anyone wise enough to learn its language and patient enough to master its computational complexities. The revolution that began with a single child's birth map in 410 BC would eventually transform star reading from the exclusive province of royal courts into a democratic art accessible to all who sought guidance from the luminaries. Individual destiny had joined royal policy as a legitimate subject for stellar consultation, and the wandering lights that once served only kings now offered their wisdom to merchants and farmers, soldiers and scholars, mothers and children, all who dared to believe that their private lives mattered enough to register in the vast computational machinery of eternity itself. Thunder rolled across the plains as Alexander's war elephants charged through the morning mist at Gaugamela, their bronze-tipped tusks gleaming like spears, while behind them marched the greatest army the world had ever seen. The young Macedonian king, who would conquer 3 continents in 13 years, carried more than swords and siege engines in his baggage train. He brought with him Hellenic curiosity about the mathematical principles underlying Mesopotamian sky science, a hunger for wisdom that would transform the intellectual treasures of ancient Babylon into the foundation of Hellenistic scholarship. Decades before Alexander's birth, Eastern wisdom had already begun flowing westward through networks of trade and diplomacy that connected the ancient centers of learning. Hellenic merchants returning from distant markets carried more than silk and spices. They brought tales of astronomer priests who could foretell eclipses decades in advance, of algorithms that reduced the chaotic dance of wandering lights to elegant mathematical formulae, of birth mapping arts that revealed individual destiny with supernatural precision. These stories kindled intellectual fires in minds already ablaze with geometric insights and philosophical speculation. The conquest that followed Alexander's victory at Gaugamela was not merely military, but profoundly intellectual, as Hellenic scholars encountered computational systems that had been refined through 2 millennia of continuous development. Where Greek star science had remained largely theoretical, content with geometric models that explained phenomena without achieving predictive accuracy, Mesopotamian sky law offered practical algorithms for calculating future events with precision that seemed almost miraculous to observers trained in purely abstract reasoning. Seleucus I, inheritor of Alexander's eastern dominions, recognized that political control over the ancient lands meant nothing without access to the intellectual heritage that had made Babylon the sky-watching capital of the world. The first Seleucid monarch established policies that encouraged collaboration between Hellenic theorists and Eastern practitioners, creating hybrid institutions where geometric insight merged with algorithmic expertise to produce innovations that neither approach could have achieved in isolation. Within the great library of Babylon, where cuneiform tablets chronicling 20 centuries of sky-watching filled chambers carved from living rock, Hellenic scholars worked alongside ancient masters to translate arithmetical algorithms into geometric language. The process was not simple linguistic conversion, but profound intellectual synthesis, as concepts developed within the framework of sexagesimal arithmetic found expression through the geometric principles that governed Hellenic mathematical thought. Apollodorus of Seleucia emerged as the most influential figure in this cross-cultural exchange, his mastery of both Hellenic geometry and Eastern computation making him the ideal interpreter between intellectual approaches that had developed along entirely different pathways. His treatises, written in Hellenic but drawing heavily upon ancient source materials, carried Mesopotamian algorithms throughout the Mediterranean world, while presenting them in forms accessible to audiences trained in geometric reasoning rather than arithmetical analysis. The Antikythera mechanism, that bronze marvel of Hellenistic engineering, discovered centuries later in Mediterranean waters, embodied the synthesis of approaches that characterized this period of intellectual fusion. Its intricate gear trains encoded Eastern computational cycles within Hellenic mechanical frameworks, creating a calculating device that could foretell eclipses, track wandering light movements, and display the complex relationships that governed phenomena. The mechanism represented more than mere technological achievement. It demonstrated how ancient mathematical insights could be transformed into physical instruments that made abstract calculations tangible and accessible. Hipparchus of Rhodes, greatest of Hellenic astronomers before Ptolemy, built his revolutionary star catalogue upon foundations laid by 8 centuries of Eastern observation. The precision that made his work possible came not from superior Hellenic instruments or keener eyesight, but from access to records that documented stellar positions across periods far longer than any individual observer could witness. When Hipparchus discovered the precession of equinoxes, that slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the stellar backdrop by 1 degree every 72 years, he was analyzing variations preserved in archives that stretched back to the dawn of systematic sky watching. The transformation of Babylon itself under Seleucid rule created new opportunities for intellectual exchange while preserving the essential character of ancient sky science. The ziggurat observatories continued functioning under royal patronage, their scholar priests maintaining the algorithms that had made their predecessors famous throughout the ancient world. Hellenic students arrived in increasing numbers to study these procedures, while Eastern masters adapted their teaching to accommodate foreign minds trained in geometric rather than arithmetical approaches to mechanics. Berossus the Chaldean, last of the great astronomer priests, played a crucial role in transmitting ancient wisdom to Hellenic audiences. His historical and stellar writings, composed in elegant prose, preserved essential features of Eastern algorithms while presenting them within literary frameworks that appealed to Mediterranean intellectual tastes. Though his original works survive only in fragments quoted by later authors, their impact extended throughout the ancient world and into medieval Islamic scholarship. Ptolemy's Almagest brought centuries of Eastern and Western thought into harmony, blending geometric theory with practical calculation to create the pinnacle of ancient sky-watching science. While Ptolemy's geometric models appeared purely Hellenic in their theoretical framework, their predictive accuracy depended entirely upon parameters derived from centuries of Eastern records. The mean motions, orbital eccentricities, and epical positions that made Ptolemy's system functional came not from Hellenic theoretical speculation, but from generations of arithmetical analysis. In the Tetrabiblos, Ptolemy blended Hellenic philosophy with Eastern practices, creating the key text that shaped astrology for centuries to come. The 4-element theory and humoral medicine that provided its theoretical foundation were distinctly Mediterranean contributions, but the 12-mansion zodiacal system, wandering light rulerships, and aspectual relationships that governed practical interpretation derived directly from ancient heritage. The synthesis created a hybrid art that satisfied Hellenic demands for rational explanation, while preserving the computational precision that had made Eastern divination supreme among ancient systems. Imperial interest in Eastern sky science initially focused on practical applications rather than theoretical understanding. Republican magistrates sought eclipse forecasts for military planning, while imperial administrators required accurate calendars for coordinating activities across territories that spanned multiple time zones and regions. The reform of the Roman calendar under Julius Caesar drew heavily upon Alexandrian astronomers who had themselves learned their algorithms from ancient sources. Vettius Valens, most prolific of Latin astrological writers, preserved numerous ancient procedures that might otherwise have been lost during the transformations of the imperial period. His Anthologiae contained detailed instructions for calculating lots, prognostication procedures, and birth mapping arts that maintained their essential Eastern character, despite translation into Latin terminology and Roman contexts. The abundance of example horoscopes in his work provided snapshots of how ancient procedures functioned in practical application throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. By the time of the Roman Empire, Eastern sky science had become deeply woven into everyday thought, its influence clearly visible across the culture of the period. Birth maps cast for ordinary citizens, farmers, merchants, soldiers, craftsmen, employed algorithms that had originated in the Tower schools of Babylon centuries earlier. The democratization of procedures that had once been restricted to royal courts represented one of the most significant achievements of the Hellenistic synthesis. Mithraism, the mystery religion that became popular among Roman soldiers and administrators, incorporated Eastern stellar symbolism into its ritual and theological frameworks. Mithraic temples featured zodiacal imagery that preserved ancient iconographic heritage, while the religion's emphasis on cycles and stellar powers reflected the Eastern understanding of mechanics. The 7 grades of Mithraic initiation corresponded to the 7 wandering lights, each associated with specific stellar powers and ritualistic practices derived from ancient customs. The networks that transmitted Eastern wisdom westward also carried it eastward into India, where it merged with indigenous traditions to create hybrid systems that combined ancient algorithms with Sanskrit mathematical innovations. The Yavanajataka, earliest Sanskrit astrological text, preserved Eastern procedures within Indian frameworks, while adapting them to local calendrical systems and religious practices. Chinese records from the Han period document contacts with Western procedures that almost certainly included ancient algorithms transmitted through Central Asian trade routes. The precision of Chinese eclipse forecasts improved dramatically during periods of increased Western contact, suggesting that Eastern computational procedures had reached Chinese sky science even in regions far from direct Hellenic or Roman penetration. The gradual decline of Babylon as a center occurred not through conquest or destruction, but through the natural migration of intellectual activity toward new centers of scholarship and patronage. Scholars who might once have studied in Eastern Tower schools increasingly traveled to Alexandria, Rhodes, or Rome, where royal and imperial courts offered greater opportunities for advancement and recognition. Seleucus on the Tigris, founded as a new capital for the Eastern Seleucid domains, briefly rivaled Babylon as a center of sky science during the Hellenistic period. The city's scholars maintained many ancient procedures while developing new synthetic approaches that incorporated Hellenic geometric insights. Until roughly 150 AD, Seleucus upheld the legacy of traditional sky watching, maintaining the ancient methods longer than any other major center. The preservation of ancient texts through Hellenic and Latin translations ensured that essential algorithms survived the decline of their original context. Medieval Islamic astronomers would rediscover these procedures through Arabic translations of works that had themselves been based upon Eastern sources, creating chains of transmission that carried ancient insights across multiple boundaries and linguistic transformations. Roman educational institutions increasingly included stellar instruction, based upon procedures that ultimately derived from Eastern sources, though often without explicit acknowledgement of their origins. The algorithms taught in Roman schools for calculating calendar dates, forecasting eclipses, and casting birth maps preserved essential features of ancient sky science, while adapting them to Latin terminology and Roman preferences. What had once been the domain of trained experts became a shared fascination, as Hellenistic civilization moved toward a broader sharing of wisdom, and star reading found its way into everyday life. Procedures that had once been jealously guarded secrets of Eastern tower schools became accessible to anyone with sufficient education to master their computational requirements. Imperial patronage of stellar scholarship during the Roman period ensured that ancient computational heritage continued to develop and evolve, rather than becoming fossilized remnants of archaic practice. The ephemerides produced for Roman administrative use incorporated refinements and corrections that maintained the essential accuracy of Eastern procedures, while adapting them to contemporary requirements. The synthesis achieved during the Hellenistic and Roman periods represented more than mere transmission of ancient procedures to new audiences. It involved fundamental transformations that created hybrid intellectual approaches, combining the best features of multiple ancient civilizations. Hellenic geometric insight provided theoretical frameworks for understanding why Eastern algorithms worked so effectively, while Roman organizational skills created institutional structures that ensured their preservation and continued development. International trade networks that connected Roman territories with regions far beyond the empire's borders carried stellar wisdom along with commercial goods, spreading ancient algorithms to societies that had never experienced direct Eastern influence. Merchants who could foretell optimal travel seasons and favorable market conditions through stellar computation enjoyed competitive advantages that made such wisdom economically valuable throughout the ancient world. Development of astrolabes and other portable instruments during this period made ancient algorithms accessible to travelers, soldiers, and administrators who needed to perform calculations while away from major centers of scholarship. These instruments encoded essential insights within mechanical frameworks that required no advanced mathematical training to operate effectively. Religious syncretism, characteristic of the Hellenistic and Roman periods, incorporated Eastern stellar deities into broader pantheons that served diverse communities throughout the Mediterranean world. Marduk became identified with Zeus Jupiter, Ishtar with Aphrodite Venus, and other ancient stellar powers with their Hellenic and Roman counterparts, creating theological frameworks that preserved archaic wisdom while making it accessible to new audiences. The philosophical schools that flourished during the Roman period, Stoicism, Neoplatonism, and others, incorporated Eastern insights about cosmic determinism and stellar powers into their theoretical systems. The Stoic concept of sympathy, the Neoplatonic understanding of hierarchies, and similar philosophical doctrines reflected ancient ideas about the interconnectedness of stellar and terrestrial phenomena. Medical applications of Eastern sky science became increasingly sophisticated during the Roman period, as physicians learned to coordinate therapeutic interventions with favorable stellar configurations. The development of medical star reading as a specialized field combined Hellenic anatomical wisdom with ancient algorithms, creating hybrid practices that shaped healing heritage throughout the ancient world. Literary works from the Hellenistic and Roman periods preserved numerous references to Eastern achievements, ensuring that awareness of ancient computational superiority would survive even when the technical details of their procedures were forgotten. Poets, historians, and philosophers regularly cited eclipse forecasts and stellar calculations as examples of human intellectual achievement at its highest level. When Babylon stopped shaping new ideas and instead became a symbol of ancient brilliance, it marked the transition from one historical age to the next. While the city's scholars continued their computational work until the 2nd century AD, their impact had already spread throughout the ancient world and beyond, carried by students, texts, and instruments that preserved essential insights within new contexts. As the last cuneiform tablets were inscribed in the ancient city that had given birth to mathematical sky science, the intellectual revolution that began beside the Euphrates had already conquered the civilized world. From Alexandria to Rome, from India to the edge of China, algorithms developed in Eastern Tower schools had become the foundation of stellar practice and astrological interpretation. The wandering lights that ancient priests had first learned to track with mathematical precision now guided navigators across distant seas, astronomers in foreign lands, and fortune tellers in countless markets, where the wisdom of ancient Babylon lived on in new forms. In the great library of Alexandria, where papyrus scrolls replaced clay tablets and Hellenic geometry merged with Eastern arithmetic, the intellectual legacy of Babylon achieved its fullest flowering. The algorithms that would guide human understanding of the cosmos for the next millennium and beyond had found new homes in new lands, ensuring that the revolutionary insights of 2007 were not lost. Ancient Skywatchers would continue to illuminate human comprehension of the stellar realm long after the last ziggurat had crumbled into dust and the ancient city had faded into legend. Silence settled over Babylon's towers like dust on forgotten treasures, as the last scholar priests completed their final work beneath luminaries that had guided human destiny for 3 millennia. Around elderly Seleucus, the Chaldean, chambers that had once buzzed with scholarly debate lay nearly empty, their clay archives gathering dust while former students pursued fortunes in distant Alexandria, Rome, or emerging centers that offered greater rewards than the fading glory of this birthplace of sky watching. Weathered hands moved across wet clay with reverent precision as Seleucus inscribed closing entries and chronicles stretching back to civilization's dawn. His stylus carved marks that would complete the final chapter of humanity's oldest intellectual pursuit. Yet even as the last flames flickered in these observatories, the fire kindled by Babylon's watchers had already spread throughout the civilized world, carried by winds of change that would ensure their discoveries would never truly die. Seeds of this final flowering had been planted centuries earlier when Alexander's successors established Hellenic kingdoms across vast territories conquered by Macedonian spears. In cosmopolitan cities arising from cultural fusion, Antioch, Pergamon, Seleucia on the Tigris, computational mastery merged with Greek theoretical sophistication to create hybrid approaches combining insights from multiple civilizations. Scholars who might once have remained isolated now collaborated across boundaries, sharing discoveries that enriched all participants in this unprecedented exchange. Mesopotamian science flowed to later civilizations through multiple pathways, preserving different aspects of the original heritage. Persian court astronomers carried methods eastward to Ctesiphon and beyond, where Sassanid rulers maintained customs blending original techniques with Zoroastrian theology. When Arab armies conquered these territories in the 7th century, they inherited not merely political control, but intellectual treasures carefully preserved through centuries of upheaval. Masha'Allah, the Jewish astronomer serving early Abbasid caliphs, exemplified complex networks through which Babylonian learning entered Islamic civilization. Born in Basra, but trained in approaches tracing lineage back to Chaldean sages, He combined computational methods with Hellenic theoretical frameworks and Persian symbolic interpretations to create syntheses that would guide star lore for centuries. His treatises on eclipse forecasting, planetary conjunctions, and astrological interpretation preserved essential features while adapting them to new religious requirements. Al-Batan, the great Syrian astronomer whose work would later earn praise from Latin Europe, built his revolutionary star catalogue upon foundations laid by 20 centuries of careful record-keeping. When he discovered errors in Ptolemy's work and proposed corrections based upon his own measurements, he continued the practice of empirical verification that had distinguished Mesopotamian watchers from their more theoretical counterparts. His Zij, comprehensive ephemerides becoming standard references for medieval science, encoded methods originating in Babylon's tower schools. Abu Mashar loomed largest among those who preserved and transmitted astrological learning to later ages. Known to Latin writers as Al-Bumasar, this Persian sage combined encyclopedic familiarity with original sources and innovative theoretical insights, creating new synthetic approaches to celestial interpretation. His great introduction became the foundational text through which medieval Europe would rediscover the computational sophistication that had made Mesopotamian star reading supreme among divinatory arts. Zai tables, proliferating throughout Islamic domains during medieval times, represented direct descendants of ephemerides that had made Babylonian science famous throughout the world. From Cordoba to Samarkand, from Cairo to Isfahan, astronomers maintained methods preserving essential features of original techniques while incorporating refinements based upon centuries of additional study. These tables ensured that precision achieved by Chaldean sages would continue guiding celestial work throughout the expanding sphere of Islamic influence. Toledan tables, compiled by astronomers in medieval Spain, played crucial roles in carrying Mesopotamian heritage to Latin Europe. These comprehensive ephemerides, based ultimately upon methods developed in Babylonian tower schools, provided European scholars their first access to computational sophistication, characterizing Middle Eastern science since antiquity. When Gerard of Cremona and other translators rendered these works into medieval Europe's scholarly language, they completed chains stretching back through multiple intermediaries to original Chaldean sources. Memory of the Chaldeans as mystical sages persisted long after Babylon's decline as an active center, creating romantic legends often obscuring the rigorous precision actually characterizing their achievements. Greek and Roman writers portrayed these figures as possessing supernatural learning, transcending ordinary human comprehension, transforming historical personalities who had been essentially computational mathematicians into mythical seers whose insights came through divine inspiration rather than patient empirical investigation. This mythologized image influenced medieval European perceptions of Middle Eastern celestial customs, creating expectations of mystical revelation, sometimes overshadowing appreciation for rigorous methods that had actually produced remarkable achievements. When European scholars encountered works preserving Babylonian techniques, they often approached them as repositories of occult secrets rather than sophisticated treatises requiring careful study and practical application. Regiomontanus and Georg Purbach, Austrian astronomers revolutionizing European celestial science during the 15th century, built theoretical innovations upon computational foundations tracing ultimate origins back to Mesopotamian sources. Their ephemerides, geometric models, and observational approaches incorporated refinements developed through centuries of scholarship, but essential frameworks they employed derived from methods first developed by Chaldean sages nearly 2 millennia earlier. Influence of Babylonian computational customs extended far beyond purely celestial applications into fields ranging from medicine and agriculture to military planning and commercial navigation. Medieval physicians consulted tables derived from original sources to determine optimal timing for surgical operations and therapeutic interventions. Farmers throughout Europe and Islamic lands used calendrical systems incorporating intercalation rules first developed by Mesopotamian chronographers. Merchants and navigators relied upon almanacs preserving methods originally created for administrative needs of Babylonian empires. Nicholas Copernicus, whose heliocentric theory would transform European cosmological thinking, built revolutionary insights upon data, including measurements preserved in the most remote archives. When he compared his own work with records stretching back through multiple intermediaries to earliest sources, he detected long-term changes in planetary behavior invisible to any single generation. Precision, making such comparisons possible, depended entirely upon accuracy characterizing original Mesopotamian celestial customs. Philosophical implications of early Middle Eastern science extended far beyond technical applications into fundamental questions about cosmic order and human destiny. Recognition that phenomena followed predictable patterns had challenged assumptions about divine arbitrariness and supernatural intervention, suggesting instead that the universe operated according to discoverable laws comprehensible through patient study and careful reasoning. This insight that natural phenomena could be reduced to relationships amenable to forecasting and control represented one of humanity's most profound intellectual achievements. When Chaldean sages first demonstrated that eclipse cycles could be computed decades in advance, they established conceptual foundations upon which all subsequent scientific development would build. Their recognition that empirical study, combined with rigorous reasoning, could penetrate existence's deepest mysteries, provided templates for every later revolution in human comprehension. Networks preserving and transmitting Babylonian methods created lasting connections between distant civilizations, transcending political boundaries and religious differences. Scholars in Baghdad corresponded with colleagues in Cordoba about refinements to tables ultimately derived from Mesopotamian sources. European universities incorporated curriculum based upon translations of works preserving original computational approaches. These intellectual exchanges created truly international communities, united by shared appreciation for sophistication, characterizing Chaldean science. What appeared to be the work of later civilizations had, in fact, begun much earlier in Mesopotamia's tower schools. Clay tablets unearthed from Babylon's ruins and other cities revealed extraordinary sophistication, characterizing earliest work, validating claims that had sometimes seemed too remarkable for credibility. The techniques that launched the original revolution unfolded across generations, each step marked by deliberate refinement and lasting insight. Tablets revealed not only final results achieved by Chaldean sages, but also intermediate steps and theoretical insights making their achievements possible, providing unprecedented glimpses into one of humanity's greatest intellectual adventures. Recognition that earlier Skywatchers had achieved precision, unsurpassed for over a millennium, transformed scholarly appreciation of Babylonian intellectual capabilities. These were not primitive stargazers struggling with rudimentary concepts, but sophisticated mathematicians whose computational methods rivaled anything produced by later civilizations. Their achievements represented the first systematic conquest of natural law through pure intellect, establishing precedents inspiring every subsequent generation of investigators. Literary and artistic customs preserving memories of Babylonian achievements ensured that appreciation for Chaldean computational mastery would survive even when direct technical expertise was temporarily lost. Epic poems, historical chronicles, and philosophical treatises regularly cited examples of early eclipse forecasts and planetary computations, creating cultural memory, maintaining awareness of past achievements through periods when skills needed to replicate them had disappeared. Enduring appeal of astrological interpretation in medieval and early modern societies provided additional motivation for preserving methods originating in Mesopotamia. Even when theoretical foundations of celestial influence were questioned or rejected, computational techniques needed for casting horoscopes and determining planetary positions remained essential tools, requiring mastery of approaches ultimately derived from Chaldean sources. Transformation of Babylonian celestial customs through successive cultural transmissions created hybrid intellectual systems combining insights from multiple civilizations while preserving essential features of original innovations. Islamic astronomers incorporated Indian mathematical techniques and Greek geometric theories into frameworks fundamentally based upon Mesopotamian computational approaches. Latin European scholars combined Islamic refinements with their own observational discoveries to create synthetic methods, maintaining continuity with Chaldean customs while adapting them to contemporary requirements. Institutional structures preserving and transmitting Babylonian heritage, Islamic observatories, European universities, monastic scriptoriums, royal libraries, created lasting infrastructure for scientific development, ensuring computational approaches would continue evolving rather than becoming fossilized remnants of past achievement. These institutions provided social and economic support, necessary for maintaining complex intellectual networks through which Chaldean learning could be preserved, studied, and refined across generations. Development of new instruments during medieval periods made Babylonian computational methods accessible to practitioners lacking access to major centers of learning. Astrolabes, armillary spheres, and other devices encoded essential approaches within mechanical frameworks, requiring no advanced training to operate effectively. These instruments democratized access to sophisticated computations, once restricted to scholarly elites, spreading practical benefits of Chaldean learning throughout society. Influence of original Mesopotamian methods on fundamental human conceptions of cosmic order, natural law, and intellectual possibility represented perhaps their most significant legacy. By demonstrating that apparently chaotic phenomena could be reduced to predictable patterns, Chaldean sages had established conceptual foundations for scientific civilization itself. Their insight that patient study, combined with rigorous reasoning, could penetrate existence's deepest mysteries, provided intellectual templates guiding human investigation of natural phenomena for millennia. Persistence of astrological beliefs and practices throughout medieval and early modern periods ensured that Babylonian computational approaches would be preserved even when their original contexts were forgotten or misunderstood. Court astrologers, medical practitioners, and popular fortune tellers all required access to accurate ephemerides and computational tables, creating economic incentives for maintaining the infrastructure originating in Chaldean tower schools. Gradual secularization of celestial studies during later medieval periods created new contexts for preserving and developing Mesopotamian heritage, without necessarily accepting astrological interpretations that had originally motivated their development. Astronomers could appreciate computational sophistication of Babylonian methods while rejecting theoretical frameworks within which they had been embedded, ensuring valuable approaches would survive changes in intellectual fashion and religious doctrine. Renaissance of classical learning, characterizing later medieval and early modern periods, brought renewed interest in Babylonian achievements, and increased respect for intellectual capabilities of earlier civilizations. Humanist scholars recovering and translating texts approached them with greater appreciation for original contexts and purposes, leading to more accurate comprehension of what Chaldean sages had actually accomplished. International networks of scholarly correspondence developing during medieval periods created unprecedented opportunities for comparing and synthesizing different versions of Mesopotamian heritage preserved through separate chains of cultural preservation. Scholars could now access Arabic translations of Greek works that had themselves been based upon Babylonian sources, allowing them to identify and correct errors accumulated during centuries of copying and translation. Development of printing technology during the 15th century revolutionized preservation and dissemination of texts, ensuring valuable manuscripts would no longer be vulnerable to accidents of fire, war, and neglect that had destroyed so many earlier works. Printed editions of ephemerides and astrological treatises made Chaldean methods accessible to much larger audiences than had ever been possible during the manuscript era. Exploration of new geographical regions during early modern periods created fresh opportunities for testing and validating Babylonian computational approaches under different conditions of latitude and longitude. Navigators carrying ephemerides based upon Chaldean techniques to distant seas could verify their accuracy and reliability in contexts far removed from their original development, providing additional confirmation of their fundamental soundness. Gradual accumulation of new data through centuries of continued study allowed later astronomers to identify and correct the few genuine errors that had crept into Babylonian methods, while confirming remarkable accuracy of their basic frameworks. This process of refinement and improvement represented natural continuation of intellectual heritage, beginning in Mesopotamian tower schools, demonstrating that Chaldean sages had established approaches capable of indefinite development and improvement. As twilight settled over lands where civilization had first learned to read eternity's script, written across the star-scattered dome of night, the intellectual revolution begun in Mesopotamian tower schools had already transformed human comprehension of the cosmos and humanity's place within it. Computational methods developed beside the Euphrates and Tigris had spread throughout the known world and beyond, carried by students and scholars, recognizing extraordinary value of approaches that could foretell the future with supernatural accuracy. In distant libraries, where papyrus and parchment had replaced clay tablets, where Arabic and Latin had supplanted cuneiform script, essential insights of original Skywatchers lived on in new forms, adapted to new contexts. Methods that had once served Babylonian kings now guided Islamic caliphs and European princes. Frameworks that had illuminated planetary movements for Chaldean priests now provided foundations for investigations continuing to expand human comprehension of the celestial realm. Greatest achievement of earliest astronomers lay not in any specific discovery or computational method, but in revolutionary recognition that the universe operated according to discoverable laws amenable to rational analysis. This insight that natural phenomena could be understood, predicted, and controlled through patient investigation and rigorous reasoning represented humanity's first conquest of cosmic mystery through pure intellect. Skywatchers who climbed Mesopotamian towers to map eternal luminaries had given their species something more precious than gold or conquest. They had provided intellectual tools necessary for comprehending existence itself. Last shadows of evening stretched across Babylon's ruins as Seleucus completed his final work and carefully stored his instruments for the journey to new lands where Chaldean learning might find more appreciative audiences. Behind him, towers that had witnessed the birth of computational celestial science stood empty against the darkening firmament, their chambers silent after 3 millennia of continuous scholarly activity. Yet even as this chapter of human intellectual history drew to its close, insights born in these halls continued their journey across time and space, ensuring that fire kindled by the first Skywatchers would never truly be extinguished. From his position atop the ziggurat, Seleucus gazed one final time at the celestial dome that had captivated human imagination since consciousness dawned. Wandering luminaries pursued their eternal dance with the same precision his predecessors had first discovered and mapped, their movements as predictable now as when the first clay tablets were inscribed with computational marks. In that moment, he grasped that his people's greatest triumph was not forecasting any particular eclipse or computing any specific planetary position, but proving that mortal minds could comprehend the very thoughts of eternity itself. Wind stirring dust around silent towers carried more than the scent of approaching night. It bore whispered promises of discoveries yet to come, of minds yet unborn who would build upon foundations laid by generations of devoted watchers. Somewhere beyond the western horizon, in lands still unknown to Mesopotamian learning, future scholars would inherit intellectual treasures that Babylon's children were now carrying into exile. Methods would be refined, tables corrected, instruments improved, but the fundamental insight would remain unchanged. That the universe speaks in the language of number, and those who learn to listen can hear the very heartbeat of creation itself. As first luminaries appeared in deepening purple of evening sky, Seleucus offered silent gratitude to countless generations who had climbed these same steps, studied these same celestial bodies, and gradually assembled the intellectual edifice, making him heir to humanity's most profound discovery. Revolution, beginning when mortal eyes first dared challenge the mystery of the star-scattered dome, had conquered not merely planetary movements, but the fundamental relationship between human consciousness and cosmic order. In learning to read the language of the heavens, they had discovered that the universe itself was written in equations decodable by patient minds, armed with stylus, clay, and inexhaustible determination to transform chaos into comprehensible pattern. Their heritage would endure as long as human beings retained capacity to look upward in wonder and courage, to believe that even the most profound mysteries might yield their secrets to those bold enough to seek them, and in that endurance lay their truest immortality, not in survival of any particular text or custom, but in persistence of the revolutionary idea making their achievements possible, that the cosmos itself was rational, knowable, and ultimately comprehensible to minds willing to undertake patient work of comprehension. Celestial fires that had guided their ancestors' first halting steps toward learning would continue shining upon every future generation, daring to reach beyond comfortable boundaries of ignorance toward infinite possibilities, awaiting discovery in the rational mind of divinity.